Okay, hello everyone. We are live in the OC Nonprofit Staying Connected group. Welcome.
Yay!
I know, yay! Thank you, Tom, for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, looking forward to a very timely and I think a long-awaited topic for those nonprofits that have been trying to very quickly scramble on how they're going to look at transitioning or first even consider taking their programs online, but then thinking about what does this mean? Like, what does this mean for me? So thank you for taking a moment. For anyone who is joining us, if you recall, on Monday, we talked about virtual meetings and just some quick tips on keeping those energetic and alive and fresh. And because I know we're having a lot of meetings nowadays. But today we're going to go a little deeper into if you are really, really looking to transition the program and pivot. Thank you, Kim. Pivoting your programs from in-person to now this online format. And so I invited Tom Partridge, who is a former colleague and now great friend of mine. We met through the Association for Talent Development. And then we also worked together, and we're going to talk about just some key things to consider when you are moving into taking the content and moving it virtually. So, Tom, why don't you first share with everyone who you are and your background in the industry, maybe a little bit too about where you work now?
Tom Partridge. I am an instructional designer by trade. I have been with the ATDOC, Association for Talent Development in Orange County for a number of years. And we focus on trying to help people become better trainers and developers. And the whole world is moving to how do you take a classroom into an online environment? And that's kind of what my main focus is in life right now. I work for an organization right now called eLearning Experts, and we focus on Moodle learning management systems and helping people take their classroom training online or use a hybrid approach, a little bit in the classroom, a little bit online, even though everybody's kind of online right now.
Yes.
But there's also the intermediate need that we're kind of working with, which is for people who maybe you're not going to go full bore online or you just don't have the resources, but how do you take the current tools available and move them using Zoom or Meeting or Team, Google Meet, whatever you're using, and then use the same tools, but make it not just a virtual meeting, but a virtual training lessons with that type of thing. So what do you want to think about as a budding junior trainer developer trying to do this without over-engineering the solution?
Okay, great.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead and finish.
Okay, and I met Victoria through ATDOC, and then she called me one day and said, "Why don't I work for her for a while?" So I did.
Volunteer. You volunteered for me first.
So I am a volunteer who became an employee.
Yes.
Who luckily and blessedly we're becoming long-term friends and working on a couple of side stuff together. So this is one of those things. And keep doing what you're doing, Victoria. It's making a difference.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, we should have a separate discussion on your skills-based volunteering transitioning into nonprofit life. That would be a good story too to share with people that are wanting to do skill-based volunteering and then wanting to get into the nonprofit sector. I think you're a great story of how that works.
Whole other conversation.
Okay, so let's get into it. So why don't we start here, actually, because you kind of ended with it in just a little earlier. Virtual tools to even consider when thinking about transitioning online. So you work for eLearning Experts, and they specialize in Moodle. But right now, I think we're all going towards Zoom and GoToMeeting, which, they're free and they're, somewhat comparable to what you could do in other platforms, but maybe just throw out some other tools that nonprofits may want to consider as they're really looking to transition in-person programming to virtual space?
Well, I think there's two levels of an answer there. And one of them is if you're looking to just experiment, which is the way to really start with, and just test things out with your learners. Anything we say today, nothing beats just talking to your learners as you're going through it and saying, is this working? Is this not working? And then just simply adjusting. Because it's hard to figure out an audience until you've trained something a number of times. But sometimes it's as simple as live videos through YouTube, or go-to meetings, or Zoom, which is having some challenges now. So I'd look into that before you just jump onto Zoom like everybody else is. But this Be Live is another option. Basically, anything that's going to give you the ability to do what we're doing now and look at what people are saying in a chat session, maybe be able to put up a screen where you can share some PowerPoints, where you can share videos, where you could put up a little quiz or a knowledge exam or ask a question, not a big quiz, but just, at key points throughout the learning. Anything that provides you with tools like that, I think is kind of the best place to start. There are things like Moodle Cloud, which is a free version of Moodle that allows you to make a full-fledged Moodle course using most of the Moodle tools that are available if you pay for it. But do it in a way where you're not having to spend a lot of money. You can experiment. It's limited to the number of students and to the number of files you can keep on the system. But it's one way to get started. But I wouldn't start there. I would start more with something like a Zoom and see how it goes to see what you want to do. Am I answering your question?
Yeah. No, I think the main thing there that you said was consider your learner. So I think sometimes we do the reverse. We assess what we have and think what platform fits the program or what platform fits our budget. And really, we need to ask ourselves what platform is going to fit our user or our audience.
Yeah, and somebody just put something in the chat, which I think kind of points to where we were going to go next, which is Zoom has been amazing, but dealing with students and direct teaching in schools, we're learning a lot of lessons right now in society about this. And a lot of the advice that I have today kind of focuses more on adult learners. And if there's a need out there, let's have another one of these, but focus more on how to keep the attention of children, because I think those are two very different things. But direct teaching within schools is when the kids can never go back into a classroom to connect with the teacher. Adult learners can attach themselves from a learning standpoint to a teacher online pretty well. A kid, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, they need that personal face-to-face, or they may not be able to make that connection.
Yes, and their attention span is different too, right?
Yes.
I mean, as an adult learner, I get distracted. So as a child, can you imagine? My 4-year-old was on a Zoom call with his preschool teacher and 12 other kids. Trying to captivate their attention all at the same time was virtually impossible. But, he was able to hone in on one person and they were able to have a nice conversation. So yes, thinking about your audience. So let's talk about adult learners versus youth. You started to go into that. For the most part, I've heard from nonprofits that they're trying to address both. Majority, though, are trying to attract youth, or they're transitioning programming for youth. Tips, advice, things to consider for youth engagement.
That's a little bit more challenging for me in terms of I haven't had a lot of I've dealt mostly with adult learners. But I would say any youth who's, I'd say, maybe 15, 16 years old and above, what we talk about today will probably apply. If you're talking about, the early teens, 10, 11, 12 years old, I think that would be something that maybe we should do some research on and come up maybe with another guest who might be able to help connect more with that.
We have someone shared, I think this is a good point, less than 5 minutes, right? Kids need it probably a bit more bite size than adults might need it. Or if you, from what I've seen, what's been happening right now, through YouTube channels of organizations that are pivoting online is they're talking to the youth, but they're providing instructions that also the adult would understand. So it's almost like a paired youth, parent-child activity.
Assuming that there's a parent standing within the vicinity.
Yes.
That's a fair point.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, going back to knowing your audience, you have to assess who's your learner, right? So what about adults then? Things to consider with the adult learners is, timing, or just in general. I know a big thing I learned in training is the WIFM, right? What's in it for me? I think you got to give every single person the what's in it for me early on in the learning dynamics. But anything broadly you want to share about adult learners?
Well, in terms of, somebody in here says Kahoot, and in terms of connecting with your people and using Kahoot, that if anybody hasn't checked that out, that's a great tool, especially if everybody has, while they're on this live feed, they also have their smartphone with them. Yes. Kahoot is a great way to do that kind of engagement and works really well for youth as well, because they can respond and see what their results are on the screen at the same time. So that's kind of an example of using the delivery system with maybe having two windows open browser-wise at the same time. You can see what's going on with the Kahoot screen and have a live feed. I think that's a great solution right there.
Yeah. And they're free right now. Someone shared they have free subscriptions going on right now. And Poll Everywhere is also a great tool. I forgot about that one. I love Poll Everywhere. I use it in the classroom. I use it with small groups. It's really great, especially if you want your audience to feel anonymous and you want to get everyone to answer. And because sometimes, especially with kids, like they're afraid to comment or they're afraid to say something, but they'll put their answer in anonymously. So Poll Everywhere is another great one. Thank you.
At the same time, if you're going to poll in an atmosphere like we're having right now, make sure that you let people know that there are things anonymous, that, if they answer wrong, they're not going to be embarrassed in front of everybody else online. I think anything that avoids a child feeling like they're being bullied online is something to kind of keep a track of. Can we just kind of start going down the list here and start with time management? Based on what you just asked, I'm thinking,
of course,
in terms of adult learners, something to keep in mind when you're used to training in a classroom and then you're going to go online is virtual time sometimes feels very different to the learner than an in-classroom time, even if there's a clock on the wall or something. So checking in with your learners on a regular basis. Are we moving too fast? Are we moving too slow? Just like I'm trying to do right now, I'm looking at my notes and I'm also trying to keep an eye on the chat to kind of keep a feel for where's the audience at. If you're talking along and the chat is working really well, and then all of a sudden the chat dries up, but you keep on talking, their perception of the time passing might be different than your perception of the time passing online. It also depends on if you're using this kind of a video feed where you can actually see people's reactions versus just a list of people on the screen. If you have 20 people, obviously you're not going to get a image for everybody all at once. But some of the software packages do have it where the images come up based on the voice of who's talking.
Okay.
So if that technology works, but that can be somewhat tricky sometimes. Also keep in mind that learners, as opposed to more of a virtual meeting, people who are trying to learn something can either learn something or they can be multitasking at the same time. Lots of people, let's be honest, take virtual meetings and they're multitasking.
Oh, yes.
But keep in mind that, if you're trying to teach something, you can't really have it both ways. So if you notice somebody is multitasking, there's nothing rude about just being bold and saying, let's try to stay focused, or simply ask them what can we do differently right now to keep things more focused so that you're interested in it.
Great. Good point. Yes. So time management, you don't want to take full, if you plan an hour, it doesn't mean you have to take the hour, right?
No, so be very flexible and be willing to adapt.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to have multiple sessions. Feel free to leave something to the next session.
Mhm.
Let me also introduce another concept here throughout everything we're going to talk about, which is having a producer. Right
Oh,
now, it's just you and me. But what
correct.
if we ask our friend Kim to kind of help keep a track of what was going on in the chat, making sure the technology is working, um, and being able to make sure who owns the presentation at any one moment, because sometimes
Mhm.
passing that between multiple virtual teachers can be awkward. If you have
Yeah.
somebody who acts as the producer behind the scenes, that can help keep, and if you, Victoria, you've been talking a little bit too long about this one topic, your story's running a little long, you can kind of do some private IM messaging on that, and that
Yes.
can help keep things on track.
Yeah, good point. So even in the Be Live atmosphere, we have a host chat. So if you and I wanted to communicate to one another, and then also this, if you're interested in the Be Live, for those listening, it does have a remote assistance option where I could give somebody remote assistance to be the producer behind the scenes. So good point. So how about we go into now, as you're transitioning, and you have to assess your content, right? So you got your content in person and you want to move this online. Let's talk about managing content overload, because I think a misconception for a lot of people moving things online is, oh, we'll just videotape ourselves doing what we do in person and put it in a PowerPoint or put it on YouTube, and that may be too much virtually. So tips for managing content overload.
Well, keep in mind, managing content overload ties back to time management in how much time can you cover in a given period of time. Do I
Okay.
have an hour? Am I going to have multiple sessions? Learners want an agenda that they feel like there's something in it for them, and that's true of all ages. And they want it. They want to be able to relate the agenda to themselves. They want an agenda that they see the trainer following and respecting, and they want to see other people in the course also respecting the agenda, so they don't feel like their time's being wasted.
Okay.
If you're new to this, there nothing beats asking before, during, and after the training. So how are we doing? Are we moving too fast? Are we moving too slow?
Yeah.
Please put your comments in chat. We can always adjust. This is flexible.
Right. Yeah. Or even asking if they need a break. Right. Someone picked
Yes.
up on that. Right. So just ask. If we need to pause, we pause. It's fine.
Or to let people know up front what the rules of engagement are. If you need to take a break, just please let us know that you've walked away, so that if I'm
Mhm.
calling on you for a question or something, I know if you've disappeared for 10 minutes because you need to go take care of something. Because
Yes.
we're all working from home and there's other family members distracting us, knocks at the door, or something that you may need to take care of because that
Mhm.
very precious Amazon order just showed up.
Yes. Yeah. So that kind of leads into then another way of managing content overload is actually chunking down
Yes.
subjects versus topics. And somebody even commented that right now. Thank you for that segue. Chunking topics. So how would one want to consider going about this? How do you know how to segment stuff out?
I like to think about the content that I'm having and try to get to know my learners, and keep in mind that during any given 1 hour period, you shouldn't have any more than, say, 3 to 5 topics, and they should closely relate to each other. And then ask yourself, for each one of those topics, how well those can be chunked down into subtopics that you're covering in like 5 minutes. And then you do a knowledge check and check in, cover something for 5 minutes, ask a question. Could everybody post your response to that? Get people doing something. Make sure that you're not lecturing for more than 5 minutes at a time, because you're going to lose people.
Right.
But I also like to keep in mind there's this, if you do some Google searching on the concept of micro learning, you're going to
Mhm.
get a lot of different opinions out there. But
Yes.
in my opinion, and they're all worth considering, but for me, micro learning is learning things within 3 to 7 minute chunks. And then there's something that gets your attention afresh and anew.
Mhm.
That I try to balance that concept with the massive success of the TED Talk model, which is somebody just lecturing at you for 18 minutes, but people are just locked in. So if it's a topic that you know your audience is in love with, sometimes you can go 18 minutes and really be interesting. So I'm not going to, everything we're saying today is a good guideline, but rules are meant to be broken if you just know why you're doing it. So if you're going to do an hour's worth of training to adults, sometimes I try to imagine I'm giving 3 TED Talks. So that every 18 minutes or so, you're wrapping it up, you make a big wow point, and then you're moving on to the next TED Talk. You may not say that out loud, but it keeps you on track to say, if I'm 38 minutes into it and I'm halfway through my first TED Talk, there's a reason why TED did all the research and said 18 minutes is the good average for a TED Talk.
Yeah, I think I like that rule of thumb. Pretend you're giving a TED Talk, and if you feel like that TED Talk is moving into a completely different subject, then it's time to chunk it out, right? As you're moving around. So that's good advice. Practice TED Talks. So go ahead.
Somebody just mentioned something in chat, just to remind everybody to pay attention to chat.
Yes.
Is like, can you also allow the viewer to read on their own and then do a reconvene? Yes, you absolutely can. That's called more of a blended learning approach. If this is formal enough for you, you could always send people emails ahead of time and give them reading assignments so that they show up more prepared. And you can even give them the whole outline and let them know, well, at key points in time, we're going to ask you what you think about X, Y, or Z. So, and if people can have their answers more prepared, then you can help to avoid the asking a really deep question after your first TED Talk. And then people may, sometimes, you know, in a classroom where you're going to ask that question and you can kind of read the room and leave it go for a minute, minute and a half while people think, that's okay.
Yeah.
Virtually online, that's death. You're going to lose people.
Yeah.
So if you can kind of tee it up a little bit, that's cool.
Good. Yeah. I think that
classroom concept. Yes, somebody's out there knows what they're talking about.
So that kind of goes into reading the room, right? So you were saying you've got your chat up right now, so you can assess the chat box and make sure that there's things happening and there's people engaged. Some people will have the opportunity, or actually will encourage video sharing. So this definitely, I know when I was in online learning, and or even now as I transition from my university job, I'm lecturing at the university, and now we're having to go online. Reading the room is so much different. You want to make sure that students are engaged and they're paying attention. So all those things you shared earlier about checking in, noticing not as much chat going on, asking yourself if you're talking too much. What are other great ways to assess and read the virtual room?
Yeah, so we talked about the Kahoot and the polling. Lots of these, many of these tools have the ability to put up a pointed question at different points in time. That isn't just to check their knowledge, that gives you a feed of where people are at. Some of these tools allow you to put up like a PowerPoint screen, and then there's drawing tools that you can use your mouse to circle things or put a dot on something. So if you put a PowerPoint slide up and then you say, what do you think about, draw your response to, what words would you add to, that's a great way for a teacher to be able to gauge where the room is at and if they're kind of getting what you're talking about.
I think in Zoom it's the annotate button, and then people can draw, which I don't know if it's on the free version, but I know I've been in some rooms. Yeah, I've been in some rooms where the instructor or the facilitator doesn't know that they have that ability, and so quickly, letting them know that, hey, yeah, we can type on it too, and we can be in this together. Actually,
that's a great phrase. We're in this together.
Yeah, we can play together. Okay. Anything else? Best ways to read the room?
Yeah, so if you can come up with a flexible agenda ahead of time, you can come up with different types of exercises or ways of delivering the discussion, and then call on a particular student and say, if you notice somebody who isn't quite paying attention or a key student or what have you, give them an opinion and ask them, So next, I'm going to let you decide. We're going to talk about apples, oranges, or bananas. I'm going to let you pick which pie we talk about next.
Mm-hmm.
And then give so that you kind of, if you do something like that, it gives them skin in the game because they made the decision. So what are the odds they're going to be paying more attention?
Okay. So
Call
not
on-
being afraid, well, what I gathered there, which is hard for some people, not being afraid to call people in to the discussion. So
have fun with it.
calling people by name, even communicating like, I haven't heard from you in a while, or would love to hear from Tom today, or things like that, because I think we're afraid even in in-person lecture or in-person programming to do that. So I think you have to be even more engaging and open to do that.
And when you become more of a skilled teacher, you'll learn in the classroom and online. Sometimes silence is a good thing.
Yes, that is true.
And if you're about ready to make an amazing point, don't be afraid to let there be a little bit of silence. And if you ask a key question and you're waiting for a response, just say out loud, we're just going to be silent for a minute until somebody speaks up. And that's okay. Because virtually, people sometimes feel like they have to, we know people in our society who, if I don't respond to that Twitter in 3.8 seconds, I'm a failure somehow. It's like, no, silence is okay. I also like what somebody says here. You can assign work buddies in a breakout room, or have people you don't even have to have a breakout room sometimes. Just assign people like in a chat to work with one other person, and then just come back in a few minutes. Say, I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to talk about this. Pick one person. We do that in a classroom all the time, right? Pick one person to speak for your group, that sort of thing. That can be very powerful. And even if other people can see what other people are putting in the chat, you're still forcing everybody to pay attention all of a sudden.
Yes.
Right. And come up with unique thoughts. Another key hint is always look for excuse me. Always look for a dominating personality. If somebody is doing way too much chatting, if they're doing way too much, I've got the answer. There's nothing wrong with sending them a private chat and say, you're doing amazing, but let's let some other people, but make sure you kind of manage that private chat versus you don't want to embarrass people publicly. That sort of thing.
Good. So then go ahead.
I would say some other quick things is just frequently ask. So I like the phrase questions, comments, or concerns. So does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about what I just said? Are we moving too fast, just right, or too slow, right? And this is if you have a producer, right, you can private IM them and kind of get their feeling for where things are at. So let me go back to that's always try to see if you can't get a producer, especially if this turns into more like a podcast or something. That can be very handy. Yes, you were gonna say something?
Well, I was gonna say, so you gave great points on the getting people engaged and keeping them active, but there's always going to be that one distracted participant, or maybe more than one. So other ways to motivate, but so you've said you've asked questions, comments, concerns, and still nothing. What about those people that just are happy to just sit there and absorb?
Okay. So I'm going to give a 2-level answer. One is if this is an ongoing course that you keep coming back to 2 to 3 times a week or every day for an hour or something like that, you can kind of get to know your group, and you can try to find out, if people are struggling at home. Right now, I say that because the world has some very distracting themes in it right now. And if you're looking at the news too much, that can be very, very distracting. So if you're doing a short training, especially, maybe doing an icebreaker up front. I've been in regular meetings on Monday nights with a certain group of people, and one of the first things we do is we literally have our pandemic talk at the beginning of each meeting. So how's everybody doing, right? And everybody gets a chance to vent and get it out there. Now that topic is off the table because you had an icebreaker about it. Now we can kind of settle down because I was listened to. So sometimes that, if you find your group is distracting in the middle of it, take a break, come back and do one of those kind of So how's everybody doing? Does anybody have a good joke that they can tell, an appropriate joke?
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, I think that's one thing we always worry about, as we're moving online and we have a lot of people, is how do I make sure I'm still engaged? How do I make sure we're all still having fun and people are enjoying the program that I'm putting out there? So, and I think this too, you just have to be okay too, that some people are probably getting a lot out of it. They're just not the ones that want to be as involved as
That's
others.
okay.
So, and that's okay. So to give yourself grace as somebody facilitating and lecturing, that it's okay if you don't get 100%
Oh,
engagement.
absolutely. That happens in a classroom or online. And if somebody says, you know what, I'm doing fine, I'm just listening, then respect that and just
Mhm.
move on. That's perfectly
Good.
cool.
Yeah.
Also, ask yourself if during your presentation, the number of videos on the screen, the number of PowerPoint slides, the number of activities you're having is anything I'm doing being distracting because
Mhm.
I'm trying to over engineer a solution?
Yeah.
Do I have a PowerPoint slide that has more than, and you can look this up, there's lots of Googling you can do on this. It's like, you
Mhm.
don't want 27 bullet points on one PowerPoint slide. You want to
Yeah.
make sure that you use a 25-point font, things like that, so that your learners aren't trying to figure out,
Yeah.
what that PowerPoint slide says, and then, oh, you just moved 2 slides on.
Hmm. Right. Good. So this kind of goes back to also the content. Talk about sequencing. I think this is something that we'll have to be mindful of as we're transitioning. I know I did this a lot when transitioning in-person training to an online format. Sometimes the content, the way you sequence what your training needs to shift and move. So you don't want to assume that the way you delivered it in person is going to be just as effective in the same order as you deliver it
Right.
online. So yeah, so talk about sequencing and what are some tips to consider when you're assessing your in-person programming and transitioning it.
Well, ultimately, somebody in the group, unfortunately, it all says Facebook user, so I don't know who to give credit to this for, but
Yeah.
somebody brought up the concept of flipped learning,
Hmm.
which is with what you do at your university has a lot of content with it. So if you can get people to do some pre-work or assignments,
Hmm.
that's going to help reduce that load of how much you need to sequence in any one given chunk. So if you can get people to show up really well prepared, then that kind of helps out with this. Sequencing virtually has a lot to do with the time management, but it's also begin with the end in mind. So,
Hmm.
especially online, start with something that is going to get their attention, that gives them a reason to stay in for the remainder of the course, for the remainder of the hour. So if you're in your agenda, you're going to start off with a big topic. That's what's in it for me. And
Hmm.
then at the end, you come back around and in a debrief or a quiz question, you wrap that up. People that, what's the biggest, it's like, think of the news programs. It's like, what do they put in the first 15 minutes of a news program, right? It's the stuff that's going to get your attention the most and keep
Yes.
you going along from the hour. And then as you're going through the hour, it's like, coming up next after the
Yeah.
break is this, right? So keep teasing people on what the sequence is going to be.
Yeah.
So if you've got a really heavy topic, you might want to leave it 20-30 minutes in and
Okay.
put the more engaging what's in it for me topics at the beginning. So you kind of front load it that way.
Okay.
If that's helping. Again, sequencing in 3 to 5. I like the 3 to 5 rule, right?
Hmm.
3 to 5 topics within an hour within a 10-minute period. Make 3 to 5 points. As a trainer who's speaking, that's a good idea, because if you realize I have been talking and I've now made 12 points on one topic, you might be losing people. You're over talking the topic, especially
Yeah.
if it's items that you can give in a job aid or a handout or
Yeah.
something like that. And by the way, a great example of a handout for this kind of stuff is Victoria's, what did you call it? Virtual meeting tips. that she has in the files that's really nicely laid out. If you can give people that type of a thing and then talk to it at a high level, you don't have to overtalk the topic, and it also helps force a sequence onto it. Also, be willing to adjust on the fly if things change in the room and put things out of sequence. If people say, well, when are we going to talk about subject C? And you had that, maybe move that up to be subject B, and move B to be the new C position, so that you keep your audience's attention.
Yeah. Some good comments in here that I think can add to thinking about content sequencing is, so if the training allows or the programming allows, assign different people to different portions. Because I know one of the things that I learned, and it doesn't seem like it should matter, but it really does, is you have to think about who's talking, who's delivering, the way content is delivered, and it's good to have transition, right? Go back and forth between different voices, different tones. It keeps people alert. It keeps people awake when all of a sudden you hear a female voice and then a male voice. Or in some cases, that's why I love bringing Tony from Pure Game on, because he's got an accent. And he and I always joke. He even says, he's like, I know I get asked to come up here because of my accent. But it actually does add a different flavor to your content. So engaging your team. I've seen a lot of nonprofits out there get their staff, their board members, their volunteers to join them on some of their programming or on their live content. So don't make it just about, don't think you're in this alone. Put the ask out there, see if there are other people that want to participate in the training world. Make this a professional development opportunity and give people the chance, right, to talk and to give their advice.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially if you're a nonprofit trying to move something online, people really appreciate effort from a teacher. Somebody in the chat mentioned that, they're nonprofit trainers versus professionally trained educators. I don't think in this context, being an overly polished educator might be a little over the top. I don't think it's needed.
Yeah.
I think just go for it. Just do it. YouTube is filled with people who just kick up a video camera and it's a teaching platform and they're just talking. So it's like, and if you don't do it very well, you'll do it better next time, right?
Yes.
And having trained in the corporate world for as long as I have, sometimes you have good training days and sometimes you don't. It really doesn't matter how long you've been teaching. Just go for it. The effort is appreciated by your students, especially if you keep them engaged and keep asking them questions. You know something they don't and they need. Just start sharing.
Yep. No, I agree. And afterwards, you can actually take what you created. Let's say it is too long, depending on the type of tool you use. So Be Live, I can download it. You can throw it, and then I can throw it into a iMovie or a recording editing function, and I can chunk down what we're talking about here and create smaller bite size, because there might be people that don't want to watch a 45-50 minute live video, but you can then take what you created and make it even smaller, and add other visual pieces or other comments, which one of my David on Monday, he actually started doing that. I gave him the video and he's breaking it down into smaller chunks and sharing it on Instagram. So go ahead.
If somebody wants some good examples of that, a couple of sources you can go look at to kind of see how they do it. The World Science Festival has hour-long videos which geek out on science, but they've also on their website chunked things down into 3 to 4 minute chunks. And they took bits and pieces out of different areas. The Royal Institution out of Britain does the same thing. A lot of stuff for kids, where they, 3 to 7 minute chunks that came from bigger chunks. So you can reuse videos in a lot of different ways. And there's don't reinvent the wheel, go out and find examples. There's a ton of people doing podcasts. Lots of universities do that. and look at those professors. They can become boring sometimes, the professors, unless you love the topic, but you can see how they're formatting things and breaking things down and making it accessible to the public.
Good, yeah. So you kind of, towards the end there, you mentioned, somebody actually said, I love the idea of a handout. It's very consistent with flipped learning. It kind of goes in line with like the debriefing, right? So when you conduct debriefs at the end, it's good to have, part of the debrief is giving out that one pager or just debriefing it for them, but then also checking in with, what made sense, what didn't make sense, like asking them to really help you get better as a trainer or as somebody that's doing this online. And I think it's okay to say, like, hey, this was our first time, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for, working through it with me, open to feedback, comments. I think that's a fair ask, right, at the end.
Yes, so don't just end.
Yeah. Yes.
So three things that you can do at a minimum is do a quick review yourself. This is what we went through today. Do a round table with everybody who's willing to talk, say, what did you most get out of it? And then offer up what some best next steps are going to be. But in addition to that, if you can then follow up with some texts or some emails that kind of say, thanks for the class today. I really appreciate what so-and-so said. Here's some additional materials. I look forward to seeing you guys next time. You don't have to go overboard. Doesn't have to be fancy. A little bit goes a long way.
Great. That's great. Yeah, I think that's something really important, because even in person, you would do the same thing. You would send an email thanking them, and maybe even a survey. Any thoughts around a survey and things to consider in that survey beyond just the typical, did you like what you heard, but maybe even questions around the environment, the platform, things like that.
Yeah, so you can go a couple of different ways on that. One way is you want to maybe survey or do a quick check on the things you actually trained to see if they actually got in some fashion. And that could either be a knowledge check or something as simple as, well, can you send back a quick paragraph on how you applied what you learned this week? But also in terms of like more of a low-level diagnostic on your own teaching style, you can ask questions about, how did the pacing go? What is there anything in this training that you would change or having do differently? Did we move too fast or too slow? What do you think about the technology? That's a really good question. If somewhere during the course somebody kept failing out on the video, which often happens, or failed out, I had to crash and come back in, right? Ask them what happened, so maybe you can help prevent that in the future or move to a different platform. Right. Did you guys like the interactive materials? Can you think of other ways that anything along these lines would be very helpful.
Great. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Tom. I think we went over everything, I think, on a high level of what to consider when transitioning in person to online. Any other quick tips or suggestions that you want to give to our nonprofit community that are venturing into this world?
Just don't let yourself feel overwhelmed.
Good point.
Google stuff, ask people for help, and just jump in and do it. Yes. What's the worst that's going to happen if you just give it a try?
I agree. I definitely agree. So for those of you that are listening or are going to be listening later, you might be wondering, okay, so now what? I still need help. I'm interested. I want to do this. So I'm actually putting together, I actually have a form that I will share with everybody in the post. If you are really looking to transition, or you're in the middle of transitioning and what Tom is saying, has been talking about, is resonating, or you need some guidance or assistance, there's a form that you can fill out, and that form, I will get notified of it, and we can set up a time to talk and discuss and actually work through your in-person content and what it looks like, what it can look like online, with some guidance on what tool you might want to consider, what platforms would be useful, and then kind of talk through the content and what would make sense. This is something that both I and Tom have done in the past, and then hopefully working with some other ATD professionals that also want to join in. We'll see if we can match you up or just connect you to others in the field that might be able to assist you in this area. So for those listening, please just keep in touch there. Yes, on the Facebook page. That's where we'll look for it. And then somebody asked about the virtual meeting tips. That's also in the Facebook page. I can send a link to that as well. So this was great. Tom, any last words?
I'll close with something. I was on a similar call last night for myself, and one topic came up that I think is a good closure, which is event plus response equals outcome. So we're all in this because an event is happening. What's going to be your response is going to dictate your outcome. So what's the worst that can happen? Go for it.
Yeah, I like it, right? Just, you said jump in and just do it. And I think along with that, this is where we're staying relevant. And that's what I've been saying for the last couple of weeks is how can we all as nonprofits remain relevant? And right now, the way to do that is to get online, to get in front of our clients, our stakeholders, our parents. I know we have a lot of nonprofits that are working in the schools, and this is your opportunity to get FaceTime with those parents and talk about your organization, talk about who you are. For the most part, some of them don't even know that there's nonprofits participating in programming in the schools. Now you have an opportunity to tell your story, to give them content, because let's face it, all parents right now need things to do with their kids or for their kids. So provide that 3-5 minute video, get them active, get them moving, encourage them to learn something new and different, and just keep them engaged. So this is definitely the time to jump in, do it, and then figure it out how to perfect it later, because we're all being gracious and understanding.
And I work closely with Victoria, so if anybody wants to talk to me about anything we talked about today in some more depth, just give her a ping and she knows how to get in touch with me.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Okay, well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody who joined us.
You.
Bye. See you later.